Thank you all for joining us. It's exciting. We have another great group here uh, for week 3 of our series of Empowering Adirondack Nonprofit Boards for Success, which is a partnership between Adirondack Foundation, Cloud Splitter Foundation, and the United Way of the Adirondack region. And we're fortunate to once again have Andy Robinson to lead us in this week's session. So take it away, Andy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, once again, I'm Andy Robinson. I am facilitating the work today. And today's topic is recruitment, nominations, and making sure that the board you have represents and honors and brings forth the community that you serve. Let me thank again our sponsors. This is being held up by the Adirondack Foundation, Cloud Splitter Foundation, and the United Way of the Adirondack region, which is Brian's home base. And of course, all of you. We have had well over 100 people register for each of these sessions. In aggregate, we're at something like 190 people unduplicated have registered. And we're seeing something like 130 at each one. So there's clearly interest and demand for this. So just so we're clear about how this works, we are going to present. We're going to have a couple of breakouts today while you have a chance to talk to each other. We are recording the session. You'll get the recording. We are also making sure that you get handouts. Those have been distributed in advance, and they'll also be posted in chat today. And also, we will make sure that you get a copy of the slide deck when this is over. And Jen, are there any other housekeeping things you want to mention?
All good. Maybe just a reminder to mute so we get clear audio from Andy, and make use of the chat. We'll monitor it and highlight questions.
Lovely. All right. So, Jen, can you see my slide? Give me a thumbs up. I'm screen sharing. Can you
Perfect.
see it? Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jen. So, we're 3 sessions in here. This is number 3. What do you remember? Like, if I realize some of you may be joining us for the first time, but a number of you are repeat customers here. What sticks from session 1 or 2? And the way to handle this is go ahead and drop your answers into chat. If you're moved to unmute and you want to raise your Zoom hand and share something verbally, and I do mean briefly, that would be helpful too. And this is a kind of market research for me because I'm always curious as to what people take away from these sessions. So if there's anything that you remember from the previous 2, and maybe even better, if there's anything you're using from the previous 2, that'd be awesome to hear about that. So I will give this a pause. And, you know, Brian, you're my second voice today, so I'm actually going to call on you. What's one thing that stuck with you from one of the earlier sessions?
I'm going to say just learning from some of the other board members, especially the first session. We had some good conversations in the breakouts and learning about, having similar experiences and or similar challenges.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And, this may be obvious, but I'll say it out loud. Part of my work today and throughout this whole series is to create opportunities for you folks to learn from each other. And I have some wisdom and some knowledge about this subject, but I don't have all of it. And a lot of you are skilled and smart board members, or you've worked with board members, you've worked with nonprofits. So a lot of this work is you supporting and helping and educating each other. So I think it's good that you mentioned that. All right. So where we're going to start today is what I would call board design. And often we end up with a random collection of board members. I'll get into that in a minute. And we can be more intentional. And so the things that I like to think about here are skills. What do they know how to do? Qualities. What are their personal traits? What sort of personality and attitude are they bringing? And representation. Who else are they bringing into the room with them? So skills is very specifically, what do they know how to do? For example, maybe they have financial skills, so they can do accounting and they can read spreadsheets. Fundraising is a classic skill we're looking for on a board. Meeting facilitation, someone who knows how to run a meeting effectively. In some cases, skills relate to your mission. You know, if you're a conservation land trust, maybe you want some people on the board who have conservation background. If you're a health center, maybe you want some medical people. If you're doing childcare, maybe you want some people who are teachers and or parents. So we often think of skills first, and that's not wrong, but that's only part of the picture. Qualities is how do they behave? And a quality might be team player, a good listener, curiosity, someone who's good at supporting the voices of other people.
And represent all of these policies to you to discuss at our next meeting.
Someone needs to mute. Thank you for doing that. And, you know, I have a colleague, I may have mentioned this earlier, I have a colleague named Kim Klein, who's one of the gurus of grassroots nonprofit stuff. And I once asked Kim, what's the one thing, most important thing you're looking for in a board member? And she said, I want a learner, right? I want someone who's curious. And that's a quality. Third thing is representation. Do they represent the breadth, the depth, the diversity of the communities you serve? And so we may be thinking in this in terms of age, we may be thinking of this in terms of geography, social class, race, gender. And I don't want to turn this into a checklist because that becomes tokenizing, but I think it's a bigger question, which is, are the necessary voices in our community represented in leadership? And this is something a lot of us are trying to do better. Often we do it imperfectly. I think that's okay, but it's something we need to pay attention to. So what you end up with is the classic board matrix. And what we have across the top here are initials of potential board members or perhaps current board members. I'll show you a filled-in version in a second. And then down the left side, we have the skills, the qualities, the representation. What are they actually bringing to the table? And the way that I would use this is, first of all, you could rate the board as a whole. Collectively, how are we doing against these criteria? Number one. Number two, you could rate board members individually. What is this individual bringing to the table? This is a little tricky because what happens is whoever is doing the rating, I'm putting that in quotes, is judging other people, and it's a little tricky to judge other people. Which leads me to the third option, is this could be a really excellent tool for self-evaluation. Once you generate the skills, the qualities, the representation that you're looking for, you could have each board member scoring themselves against those criteria to help them thinking about what am I bringing to this? The way I generally score on this is we have the plus, which is excellent, outstanding, really good. Check mark is adequate, good enough. Minus is not so good. Minus is poor. This is a gap. This is a problem. And question mark is, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I don't know if we have that or not. So here is an example of what this might look like if you started to fill it in real world. And you'll see me looking away because I'm working off of two screens here. So bear with me while I do that. Some of the skills, qualities, and representation here: meeting facilitation skills, someone who's a team player, someone who has available time, somebody who can actually come to meetings, participate, do the work, somebody who has experience on other boards, so they're not brand new to this, and willingness to fundraise. Now, this is a random list. When we work this exercise in a few minutes, you and your teammates might come up with 15 or 20 different things. These are just placeholders for the purpose of showing you how this works. And then across the top, we have the initials of relevant board members. Then each of them is given a score against these criteria. And if you look at this carefully, you'll see overall we're doing fairly well, but there are some gaps. And there are certainly some board members who are bringing more to the table than others. And the idea here is you use this to do what the scientists would call a gap analysis. You're trying to figure out where the gaps are so that you can fill them. The alternative is you're doing nominations and people pull out their phone and they start swiping them through their phone and like I know a guy who might be good, or my friend Jane, she'd be okay for this. And Jane may be an excellent board member, but that wasn't a very thoughtful process. So my goal here, and I'll use the word again, I really want you to design your board, not only based on what you need now, but what you need in the future. And one of our topics today, which we'll get to at the end of the hour, is succession planning. It's how do we actually prepare for the next generation of leadership within our organizations. So I want to give you a chance to get with colleagues and work this. And we're going to set up breakouts. Dan, let's give about 10 minutes on this, maybe 8 or 9 minutes, something like that. And what will happen here, you've done this before by now, you're going to be going into a room with some other people, and your job is to brainstorm collectively the skills, the qualities, the representation you would like on your board. If you end up blending those categories, it's fine. It's not meant to be specific buckets. These things overlap. And there may be things that are unique to your organization. Having done this exercise many times, I can tell you that 90% of what you brainstorm is going to be relevant to everybody on the circle. Because in many cases, we are looking for the same things from our board members. So it is a brainstorm. I do encourage you to take notes. My longer term goal here is to bring this exercise back to your board, to your organization, and repeat it in real time with your colleagues as a way of starting to design the board that you need. So today is essentially a warm-up. And if you come up with stuff that you want to keep and use with your own board, I think that's excellent. But I want you to practice doing this exercise with the intention of bringing it back to your organizations and doing it with your own board and your own leadership staff. So let's do the breakouts. And we will have you back here. Jen, let's aim for 8 minutes.
Okay.
And I look forward to seeing you all and have a good conversation. Good to see your faces. So the way I want to do a report out on this is if you could share in chat anything that you brainstormed that was meaningful. And you can give us the whole list, it's totally fine. But if there are criteria that came up where you thought, wow, I need that, or that is not one I've been thinking about, or this is one that we have to prioritize in our organization, that'd be really helpful. And while you're doing that, John wanted to underline a couple of criteria that is important for him, and I think for many of us. So John, go for it.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everybody. Just a couple of other things to consider when you're thinking about skill sets and representation, particularly if you're a regional nonprofit, but even if you're not, even if you're serving a particular locale. And those two things are regional representation. It's always good to have a board that is representative of your region, and also certainly to consider having consumers of your services represented there. And again, that can be a broad range of nonprofits that have a variety of consumers. But again, in addition to your typical skill sets like accounting and finance and human services and arts and culture and things that you might consider, again, always good to consider, is the region represented geographically well, and are consumers represented? So Andy allowed me to mention that. I thought it was important. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, John. And, the consumers is a big deal because the whole theory behind having a tax deduction and not paying taxes and all that is you're representing the community you serve. That's the whole theory behind the law. And so, if you're an arts organization, you need some artists on the board, right? If you're serving the disability community, you need some people with disability, with lived experience, serving on the board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we can't really underline that enough. So once again, if you want to add anything in chat, we will save the chat log. We will share it out. And so we can all learn from each other in this process. As you're doing that, I want to move us to our next chunk of work here. I am a great believer in board job descriptions. And I don't know if you've ever taken a paid job without seeing a job description first, but I'm guessing it went badly. Because there was probably stuff that you were tasked with doing that you didn't know you were going to be tasked with doing until you'd already accepted the job. So board service is a job. It's just an unpaid job. It's a volunteer gig. So why do we need these? First of all, as I've noted, it sets clear expectations. Secondly, I think it helps with recruitment. Because I think if you can show somebody a job description, they're thinking, wow, this group is organized. They've thought about this. I think a good one is reciprocal. And we've got a couple of samples, which I'll get to in a minute. I think a good job description is reciprocal, meaning it not only says what's expected of you as a board member, but also what you can expect in return. For example, we expect you to be a fiduciary. We expect you to be mindful of the organization's business model and help make sure it's financially healthy. We certainly talked about this last week. That's what's expected of you. What you can expect in return as a board member is someone is going to train me how to read these financial statements. Somebody's going to help me understand what the business model is so that I have some knowledge of how we work, right? Here's another example. We expect you to be an ambassador in the community. We expect you to represent with whatever networks you're in. In exchange, we're going to train you how to do that. Right? We're going to help you, if you want to share stuff in social media, we'll provide you with stuff to share. If you're willing to talk in public, we'll train you how to do that. So the idea is that everything you're asked to do, you're given the tools and the training, which I think is only fair. Finally, the beauty of this is it weeds out poor candidates, because if you give somebody a job description and they say, I don't have the time or I don't have the skills for this, you would much rather find that out before you put them on the board rather than after you put them on the board. And, we should never be so desperate that we will accept anyone who says yes. In my fantasy world, I realize it's a fantasy. In my fantasy world, you have more people who want to be on your board than you have slots. And therefore, you can do a little picking and choosing based on what people are bringing to the table in terms of their skills, their qualities, their representation. So we have provided a couple of samples. We sent these out in advance. We will also make sure that the links are in chat. And what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to break the Zoom rule here, and I'm actually going to have a couple of minutes of quiet. And what I want you to do is to open up those documents. One says sample board job description. And what you'll notice about that one is it's two columns. One column is what board members provide. The other column is what they can expect in return. And it's one page, it's pretty simple. And you take a look at that. The other one is a sample that comes to us from a conservation land trust in North Carolina. They're the Carolina Mountain Land Conservancy. And it's a somewhat different format, but it's the same principle. Here's what I'm expected to do as a board member, top half of the page. In return, I expect the following, bottom half of the page. So similar concept, slightly different format. So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to glance through these. You don't have to memorize them. There won't be a quiz. And once you've had a minute or two to look at these, we're going to send you off into breakouts again. And we're going to have you share with other people what you would like to borrow or steal or adapt from these documents. And we're given to you as Word documents because we want you to mess with them, right? We want you to turn them into the perfect version for your organization. So read them first. If you have it printed out, you want to mark them up, that's awesome. So underline something you like or something you have a question about. And then after a couple of minutes, we will send you off into breakouts and have you share with others what is interesting or compelling about these or what you'd like to borrow for your own. So we're actually going to have a couple of minutes of silence just so you can read. Send you off into Excellent. Welcome back, folks. So once again, if you want to drop anything into chat that's useful, I'm also happy to have people raise their hand. Oh, someone's unmuted. I'm also happy to have people raise their Zoom hand. And if you have any questions about job descriptions and or any comments, this is a chance to jump in. So I will give that a second. If anyone wants to ask a question about this, or raise a concern or cheer for the idea of a board job description or share something from your own, this is a chance to hear from you.
I'll ask a question. Do you, this is Barbara Rotier. Are you requiring people to sign the job description? I forget looking at them.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah. I have done versions with signatures. We have to stress that this is not a legally binding document, right? I mean, that's not the intention here. But if you have like two signatures, like signature of the board chair and the signature of the board member, and there's a process of them sitting down, talking through it, having a conversation about it, and then countersigning it, it's a little bit of a ritual. And I say that in a positive sense, because it's like, I care enough to have a conversation with you. You care enough to have a conversation with me. We are agreeing with what's here. And therefore the follow through gets easier because people have actually gone through the process of reading it, talking about it, and signing it together. So Barbara, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that is helpful. Michael Bettman, I see you. You'll need to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I think that this sheet is really wonderfully helpful and should be widely utilized. And there are things that I think need to be in the sheet for every board, and some things that don't. I think it's obvious that it's necessary for a prospective board member to know how much time it's going to take and commit to that time. One of the things I think is sort of interesting is that some boards are fundraising boards and some aren't. But it seems to me that for sort of emotional reasons, it's important for everyone on a board to commit financially. It may be a minimal amount,
Right.
depending on financial realities and on the board. But I think that is something that, sometimes gets passed over.
Thank you. And I mean, my 20-second spiel on this is I do believe that every board member should give whatever they're capable of giving. And, what I often say, and you could put this in your board job description if you wanted to, is while you're on the board, we expect to be one of your top 3 financial charitable commitments, whatever that means to you. And for some people, that might mean $50 because that's a lot of money for them. For other people, that might mean $5,000. So to be sort of blunt about this, I want a diverse board economically. I want rich people on your board. I want poor people on your board. I want middle income people on your board. I want all of them. And I absolutely believe that everyone can give something. So the next session we're doing, I believe, is on boards and fundraising. So come back in a week and we're going to dive into that topic in much more detail. Michael T., you're up next.
Hi, thank you. I really like both of these documents. I think, number one, because they're very concise and very clear.
Yeah.
And I think that, my own experience, I've been on the board at Lake Placid Center for the Arts for 15 months. And I think the organization does a good job of trying to do some of these things. But, the executive director and the staff and, the board chairs are very busy. And sometimes some of these things fall between the cracks. So particularly the job description serves as a very helpful checklist. I was kind of chuckling at one thing, seeing the agendas and the financial statements 1 week in advance. Staff is always, they've got more work that they can do. And there are many times that we get the agenda 3 hours before the meeting, or we get the financial statement 3 hours before the meeting. And that's a tough one, because of the time pressure, but, the continual reminder about how important it is to get those documents out ahead of a meeting affects the ability of the board to function effectively. I don't know if this has been covered elsewhere, but another thing I would sort of add to this is onboarding and
Yeah.
orientation. It takes more than an orientation. Like many boards, like Placid Center for the Arts is made up of people who have known each other for a very long time. I come from outside that community, and I didn't know anyone. And so they weren't in the habit of doing simple things like name tags
Right.
or name cards in front of board
Right.
members. And I found my first board meeting very uncomfortable because of that. They're working on it, but they got a ways to go. So that's just another thing I would add to that list.
Okay. And I will do a little shout out for John and Brian. Session 5 is about board onboarding.
Great.
So in a couple of weeks, they're going to be talking about, that's one of the topics they will be addressing. So thank you for lifting that up. So I want to move on. Before I do, I want to rant for a minute about the time question, because Michael Bettman said, how much time is expected. And you should note that neither of the two documents that I give you was explicit on this. It didn't say we expect board members to give us 8 hours a month or whatever. And I get recruited to be on boards. And if I've told this story already, I apologize for repeating myself. But I get recruited to be on boards. And the first question I ask is, how much time do you expect of me? And I never get a straight answer. No one can ever say it's X number of hours, right? So my advice to you, and this is out of the box, but I'm loving it, is I want you to have timesheets for your board members. I want you to do a time study. And I want them to be anonymous because I don't want board members to fudge their hours. And what I'm envisioning is one page, and it says preparing for meetings, coming to meetings, serving on committees, helping with fundraising, being an ambassador, whatever the relevant categories are for your board volunteerism. And everybody tracks their hours for, 3 months or 6 months, some period of time. And then they turn in their anonymous timesheets and you calculate. And then when you come to Andy and you say, Andy, will you be on the board? And I say, how many hours does it take? You can say, well, we did a time study and here's what we learned. The minimum amount, I'm making up numbers here, the minimum amount that a board member put in was 4 hours a month. And the maximum amount, which was the board chair, was 25 hours a month. And the median amount was about 8.5 hours a month. And so that's what we know about how much time our board members are spending. To which I say, good for you. I might be more likely to be on your board because you actually wrestled that question to the ground. So I'm thinking we need better data on how much time board members spend, and it's up to all of us to collect that data. So let us move on. Our final topic for this afternoon is succession planning, which is basically how do we identify and recruit and groom and lift up the next generation of leaders for our organization. And today's purpose is for boards, but this is also true for senior staff, right? There is turnover. And there's also the whole demographic challenge of getting people to step into these roles. Volunteerism is down across the US and has been down for about 20 years. And younger generations are less likely to do this. One of the reasons our boards tend to get older and grayer. And so we need to be thinking intentionally about how do we bring new people in, and that might mean changing the governance model or changing the meeting schedule or thinking differently about what board service means for your organization. Other point here, and I might have some founders in the room. If you're a founder, I love you, and you probably can't stay forever. Because the skill set that it takes to found something, or it's a little different skills it takes to grow something into maturity where it can stand on its own feet. And so often the skills, qualities, representation we're looking for at one stage of our organization's lifespan will change over time. And the really thoughtful leaders are not just thinking about what do we need now, but what do we need 5 years from now? What do we need 10 years from now? How do we recruit leadership that can help us get those things? And this is high level thinking. It's not easy to do, but I don't think it's optional. I really think we have to do this. So I want to give you a little bit of nuts and bolts on the succession planning stuff, how to think about this. First of all, you probably need two plans. You need a contingency plan. If leadership leaves unexpectedly, if somebody moves to another state, if somebody gets ill and is in the hospital, if somebody has to care for an ailing spouse or parent or partner and they no longer have the time to do the job. And sometimes you can't plan for these things. If somebody gets in a car wreck, what are you going to do? And then there's the long-term leadership succession. What are we doing consciously in a long-term way to recruit new leaders, to train them up, to give them skills, to empower them to do the work? If you're doing these plans, these are some of the things to include. Now, calendar. When do we think these transitions are going to take place? And a very quick story from my own life. The last time I had a day job was 30 years ago, so it's been a while. But I went to my last boss and I said, this is a while back, I said, I'm giving you 2 years notice. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, I aspire to start my own consulting business, but I'm going to do it gradually. And this year, I'm going to go to 4 days a week, and I'm going to start the consulting stuff around the edges of that. And in year 2, we're going to hire my successor, bring somebody on 4 or 5 days a week. I will go to halftime. I will train that person to do my job. And then while that's happening, I will be building my consulting business. So by the time we get to year 3 and I leave, you will have fully trained staff, and I will have a business that can support me. And to his credit, my boss said, good for you. That's reasonable. You should do that. I support you. So that was my succession plan. And I didn't have a phrase for it. I didn't have the language, but that's what was going on. And in that case, I said 2 years. I actually named the time. So I think that's part of this. You need to figure out the skills and the qualifications for the people you are bringing in. Are you looking for people internally or externally? This is especially true if you're trying to find a new executive director, a new CEO. Probably not the case of the board chair, but if no one on the board wants to be the chair and you've got a window of time, you need to bring in some new board members who have the potential to step into that role. And then there's the stuff of who does what during the transition. And I've seen organizations where they had a longtime CEO, executive director, and they brought in a new person, and there was an overlap period. And often the power during that overlap period was very muddy. And so you have to sort of clarify who's going to do what during that time. You need a communications plan, right? The world is curious about what's going on in your organization. So you have to be able to communicate with your donors, with your allies, with your partners, with your funders. If you work with government agencies, you need to communicate with them. The general public too, all of that. Transitions cost some money. You need to budget for them. I think that the third bullet here is maybe the most important one, which is the handing off of the relationships. And especially if you have long-term leadership that knows all the key people, all the players, key donors, key funders, key partners, the tendency is to keep those relationships in one's back pocket. And you really have to be intentional about handing them off. And, literally saying, this is Martha. Martha is taking over for me. You need to get to know Martha. You need to be in relationship with her too, because this process will happen. And hopefully there's a party. Hopefully as somebody leaves, you celebrate that. I mean, sometimes people leave in ways that aren't celebratory, but assuming you have a good process, you want to celebrate the leader, parentheses, you probably also want to use that as a fundraising moment. Because if you have a long-term person who's leaving, you should raise some money off of that. So that's just a quick snapshot of how we need to be thinking about this. You may have questions about this topic or anything else we've talked about today. So put questions in chat. CJ, I know you've been paying attention to chat. Is there anything that came in earlier I should address now? You may have to unmute if you're there.
I think we're It looks like we're covering most of people are answering each other's questions. There was
That's
questions
good.
about where they could get the materials. And there was a question about board orientation, but you said we're going to cover that in session
Yep.
5.
Yep.
Um, so I think we're up to date unless someone has a question they want to raise their hand or put it in the
Yeah.
chat right
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
Barbara, I see your human hand. You can raise that too.
Um, so I've been remiss in trying to follow up on some of this stuff, and so I need to clarify how I would get the materials or who sends it out. What name am I looking for? I get so much email, I can't find anything. So,
Jen,
um,
that's to you. What's the answer to that?
Yes, so you'll receive emails from me or from Zoom, which I think is attached to our info at. And each week I attach the worksheets that Andy will look at during the session. In our chat box right now, and I put this in every email, there's a master Google Drive folder where all the materials from each week are organized week by week, and the raw recordings. I also have everything posted on YouTube. Give me a minute. I'll pull that link up and post it here in the chat for everybody.
so
Thank you.
when you say it's in the chat
It,
folder, I have no idea how to get that after we leave this.
okay, great. I will, Barbara, I'll look for you. I'll just make a note to forward you the latest. Make sure that it's at the top of your inbox.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay. Thank you very
Joanne, I
much.
see your Zoom hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say if people are a CEO on this training, I really think talking with, communicating with, orienting your board members is one of the most important roles in your job. Having a really good board is super important. And if you don't, your life is going to be miserable. So put the time and effort into it up front.
So, I mean, Joanne is the survivor. I'm like, how long have you been in your position?
Since 2001, I've been the
Yeah.
CEO.
Congratulations. Yeah. So you don't last that long unless you figure out a way to manage your board. So good for you. I think that's right. I mean, sometimes it feels like a pain in the butt. We talked last week about sometimes boards are cost centers and not profit centers. Yeah, maybe that's just what we're living with here. So next week, we're talking about boards and fundraising, the topic that never goes away. On the 4th, we will have John and Brian talking about orientation and training. And then I'll be back for the last session on April 11th, which is about, okay, are there other ways to organize ourselves that don't require a 501c3, or what other hybrids are out there? And I'll also talk a little bit about nonprofit life cycles. I am the author of many books. This is one of those books, What Every Board Member Needs to Know, Do, and Avoid, which is a version of this workshop in a book. And then my contact here is here. And of course, I will look forward to seeing everybody next week. So we're at the top of the hour. We'll stay for a few minutes of overtime if anyone has additional questions that we didn't have a chance to get to during the hour. So you're welcome to hang out. Jen, do you want to do the outro, or who's going to do that?
Happy to hear. And I'm following along in the chat for folks who need help, just double checking on the resources. So hang on a minute and we'll make sure we get your information. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining the session today. We look forward to next week's and to staying in touch and connected. Have a great weekend and great rest of your Friday. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.